Welcome back to our panel discussion, Government Imperatives for Data Management in the Cloud, sponsored by Commvault and Amazon Web Services, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Dan Kaysen, Senior Manager of Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services. Craig McCullough is Vice President for Commvault Federal Sales. Frank Konechny is the Chief Technology Officer of the Air Force, and Greg Garcia is the Chief Information Officer of the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about data analytics. And this is a huge effort for, on the civilian side, as a way of improving digital services and mission delivery. I think on the military side, maybe not as much for digital services to the public, although perhaps in the case of the Army Corps of Engineers it certainly would be, but certainly for all across DoD it's a way of getting at understanding what you're doing better. So I'd like to just discuss that a little bit further, and types of tools that you are thinking of, not so much products, but classes of tools, and what it is, the approaches you're taking to data analysis and how you're getting it all together to analyze. And Frank, we'll start with you this time.
Okay, as part of our Chief Data Office capabilities, we're actually, the office is charged with actually looking for sources of data and combining them together to give the analytics person, the data scientist, that capability. Because what we found out was that, of course, most of the data is across multiple functional areas. And when you try to combine multiple functional areas together, you get the stovepipe effect from the functionals that says, I don't trust him or her with my data. And so the data office is supposed to relieve that problem space by being the agent of pushing the data together, looking at the data, validating that it's actually correct and meaningful, as opposed to just somebody running through the data sources and pulling things together, and then delivering it to the analytics person, the data analytics engineer that's actually going to do the analysis. And we do this a lot because, in fact, we have a project right now that combines multiple data sets together, and they're trying to determine the best tool sets to actually use to do some of the analytical work. And a lot of the analytical work is predictive analysis, in essence. For instance, when predict, the fuel consumptions for the various aircraft given various weather conditions and locations where they are. You want to predict, one of the big things is why people are leaving the Air Force and determining what best practice you can do to actually make them stay longer. And it's things like that that's in the predictive analysis capability they're trying to get to. Eventually they're going to be more farther analysis, some machine learning capabilities that we're also looking at across the board. For, insider threat has always been a big one that everybody is playing with right now. But there's other things too that we're trying to do machine learning for. For instance, there was an interesting project about what should be the paint structure on top of the aircraft, given that it goes through various weather conditions and everything else, and what machine learning could actually do the painting for us. So there's lots of ways of looking at where we're trying to get to. But
and
then
color,
again,
as long as it's gray.
Depends on the aircraft. Black is a good color too.
Black's good, but not pink or sky
not pink
blue
or red,
or like that, right?
But so we're trying to play that and looking at it across the board. Again, it depends on what is your authoritative data sources, and they're very important. And as we develop the analytical data lakes, to support this, is where you put those data lakes, how fast you update those, because every data has a time limit associated with it, use by date, if you will, that we're trying to get to. That the analytics from 5 years ago is not applicable to anything we're doing today.
And that's why you need those data officers, because as you said, to validate that, because
yes.
You can get a source that may look like it fits in there in the particular analysis you're doing, but if it's the wrong data, you'll get a really way far off result.
Or if there are conditions that change dramatically between when you took the first set as opposed to the second set, somebody has to understand all that. And that's why the data scientists and the analysts are there.
And how does your cloud strategy overlay that effort?
That's where you're going to put the information and how you're going to use it. I mean, we talked about putting things in the cloud and using the tools in the cloud to actually support the analytics. Because again, we want to have a multi-processor capability that's pretty fast. And instead of keeping it in-house, which is not the place to do this, we're going to move it to the commercial clouds or government clouds or whatever it is to actually do the analysis.
And do you have a different architectural setup such that someone can analyze data, run a tool across a data set, ask that query question, and yet not download the data such that it can end up local and corrupted? Or
yes, we don't want anything local and corrupted. So yes, it's a connection back out to wherever we put the data lake and whatever processors we connect to it. We even talked about having the data lake in a different facility than actually we're doing the analysis work.
Okay, and I guess there's a distinction between lake and warehouse in the Hadoop era, is that correct?
Yeah, warehouses, specialized access for, you had to predetermine what your queries were going to be before you set up a warehouse. Let's put it that way.
Okay, as opposed to the lake.
As a lake is, you don't really know what your queries are going to be. You just have lots of information that you want to combine together.
Okay, just throw your rod in there and see what you yank up. All right, and Greg, we talked about also the fact that you have a public-facing piece here.
Yeah, I think that's really important. One of the things that you have to prepare for your data is both how do you merge structured data that you may possess and have authoritative sources for, and unstructured data, which might be what's going on in Twitter or Facebook, and how do you combine those sources to get the insights for actionable response. That's one of the things that, so we'll have inundation mapping, but maybe you also combine that with the ability to comb through Twitter or Facebook to see people posting photos, and how do you compare and contrast that from an inundation
observation.
Exactly. Everybody's a sensor, right? Everybody's got a phone. Everybody's got two phones sometimes, right? They have a camera. They have lots of information that they present to the global commons, and how do you make sense of that in the sense of public response, public safety, and prevention of incidents. Really, the Corps of Engineers, this is really a knowledge management tasking for us. You know, how do you share what a district in the Northwest Division experiences in lake management, river management, with someone in a different division across the country or across the globe? So really, this is how we approach this, in the sense of having great attention to discovering internal information for like or similar processes. So we've built you know, sort of a search appliance and some sharing techniques, geofences where you can just draw a circle on a map and say, give me everything that's related to blank in this. Really spending some time on almost an insight-driven roadmap, where a commander could say, I would love to know every permit in this area, and then only supporting the data that builds that insight versus pulling in, you know, terabytes of data to going through months and months and years of data preparation. Maybe specifically looking for an insight that's relevant to today's fight, and maybe localizing the data sets and then presenting that to them very rapid in an agile sense, so they can see that insight in a matter of days and weeks, not in months or quarters.
So given the wide range of possibilities that someone would want to ask of this data, then you're also talking a data lake approach where it's cloud hosted. Otherwise, it would take weeks to fulfill something. I think
for the Corps of Engineers, we've kind of are supportive of a hybrid strategy. It can't all be in the cloud. So for critical, because again, the critical link there is a cloud and a customer are connected. If that connection has some permutations, you don't want to not have access to the data. So we're really, where it's critical, really endorse the idea of special purpose processing nodes at specific installations that may have a flood fight mission or a contingency response mission, so they have cached data they can rely on in terms of national emergencies, so they're not dependent on a cloud that's not reachable. So I think that's a kind of an important blend of having a hybrid strategy for cloud and efficiencies and redundancies, but also having capability to fight when conditions are not optimal.
So really, then you're talking about flexibility.
Flexibility,
Extreme
agility,
flexibility,
and again, back to your point about redundancy at a couple of places.
And Greg, we'll come back to you on what are some of the best practices to make sure that happens, because I think that's a common theme we're hearing across the government, is that requirement.
I think that a lot of it stems from what we were just talking about here, right? You have predictive analysis, you have knowledge management, and that all is going to be anchored in the ability to access whatever data is being produced and knowing that that data is out there. One of the things I was discussing with a colleague last week, which is pretty interesting, and kind of the direction this is all going in, is taking that information, taking that data, and as we said earlier, there's no real stale backup anymore, like Dan had said. Being able to analyze that data almost in an AI fashion, so that folks on the ground might be able to see a connection, see a similarity, make an assessment ahead of an actual event because of data that resided in the cloud, in their data lake or in their data warehouse, and saying, you know what, this might not have been actionable and relevant yesterday, but right now it is, and what do we need to do with this? And then we step in and make some decisions on a best educated guess as to what this data is trying to tell us and how we move against it. So I think that from a best practice perspective, it all starts with knowing what you have, knowing how you're collecting it and where you're putting it, and being able to access it, the data.
And Dan, that sounds like no one's ever going to buy an optical jukebox anymore to put data on for 10-minute recovery, or query it and in the morning you'll have your data, which means implies to me that there's also a forensic analytical capability that might be afforded by this different architecture, because you may want to look at those contracts from 6 months ago or something.
Yep. When you think about ultimately the endpoint that we're trying to get to is really, really valuable artificial intelligence that can do predictive analytics, et cetera. In order to do that, you have to have effective machine learning. In order to do that, you have to have enough data from disparate sources to make that learning possible. The only way to do that is to have massive data store that's aggregated in some way, and that's really where the cloud is a great landing point for that. I concur that having edge points and being able to communicate on the edges in a hybrid fashion is going to be required. So you think about disaster scenarios, those things too. But when we come back to what's going to be required for the real endpoint of where we need to go around the analytics and machine learning, et cetera, and ultimately AI, cloud architecture there. And if you look at some of the cloud platforms like AWS, where we have built-in capabilities around not just data lakes and like Redshift and EMR, but machine learning, and then some AI services that have come out over the last year, like Recognition and Vox for photo, et cetera. So those are services that are usable today by agencies, and that gets better and better every single year. So what we'll find is that those organizations that are looking to leverage those AI services, it can be much more accessible. 5 years ago, you would have had to build this yourself, and it would have been really challenging to do.
All right, in the few minutes we have left, we've got about 3 more minutes left, I'd like to just discuss the idea of DevOps and test ops. This was kind of the original application of cloud computing in the federal government, and some of the early efforts didn't quite pan out from federal offerings for DevOps environments, but that still is very active pursuit for federal agencies, is the DevOps approach to application development, in many ways because of the cloud and because of the existence of these multiply sourced data pools or data lakes. So maybe quickly tell us what you're doing with respect to DevOps.
Right. I think Agile is a big part of our mindset nowadays. Rapid development of applications, the ability of cloud to actually spin up, spin down capability is very helpful for us. If you need a particular SaaS or platform, you can dial that up, do your development, do your testing, and then dial that down so you don't own that lingering O&M bill. I think that's a huge benefit for us, and we're running in that direction.
Okay, and Frank, how about the Air Force and DevOps?
We've been doing DevOps for a while in the cloud, and what we're trying to do is making it so that we have a secure platform that we have ready, plus the secure vendor for the impact levels that we need to do, and so that DevOps all of a sudden becomes a very quick way of actually fielding an application, because they inherit all the RMF controls from all those things. And we're actually doing one right now that's pretty quick. In fact, they actually come out with a release like every week now.
All right, and by the way, is it done by Air Force coders, this DevOps, or there's some sort of
there's a combination
hybrid approach there too?
It's a hybrid approach.
Fewer blue shirts sitting at terminals doing C++.
No, they're trying to get that way too now for some critical applications. Yes, we actually have that for a critical application, the AOC right now.
All right, well, interesting note to close on, but we are out of time. I want to thank today's guests. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com. Use the search term Commvault AWS.
On behalf of Commvault and Amazon Web Services, thank you for joining us. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with downloaded instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.